I honestly never get tired of it because the people are different every day. I'm changing from day to day. Perceptions and the seasons change, and one spring is not like the next spring, and the variation and just potential for things to be interested in is so vast that how could anyone ever get jaded?
From NCPR, this is Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Community Foundation. In support of the Adirondack Community Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
Hey, it's Mitch Teich, and this is the part of the Northwards podcast in which I'd usually be talking with our producer, Ethan Shanty, about, whatever entered our collective stream of consciousness on the way into the studio. But sad news today, Ethan has once again selfishly gone on vacation. And I thought I could just talk about whatever pops into my head for the next 8 or 10 minutes, or tell you a little bit about what I was listening to in the car on the ride to work, but I would probably lose our 6 or 7 listeners, or at least most of them. So instead, I'll tell you just a little bit about today's encore edition of Northwards. We are revisiting our interview with naturalist Ed Kanze, who has been leading people on Adirondack hikes, photographing, and writing about the natural environment for decades. He has written a terrific collection of essays called The Nature of the Place, which is what brought him to our studios last spring. He is also going to be my guest on an interview series I host for the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake, plug, called In the Adirondack Library on Monday, December 1st in the evening. And so you can join us for that and ask all the questions that I neglected to ask in the conversation that you are about to hear. Ed Kanze, thanks so much for coming to see us.
Well, thanks, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't been in the station here in a while. It's a great place. You guys do wonderful work, and thanks for having me on the air.
Well, we clean the place up just for your benefit.
All right.
What's your secret to seeing the world around you with fresh eyes?
I'm not sure I have a secret other than just to be interested. I had coffee with a friend yesterday, was recently retired from teaching at Paul Smith's, and he was talking to me about the beginner's mind. I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I like it a lot. So I guess I try to cultivate, always feeling like I'm a student in my work as a naturalist, which I've been doing for about 45 years, hard as that is for a young guy like me to believe. People try to introduce me sometimes to a group as an expert, and I'm not an expert in anything. I'm a little bit of everythingologist, I introduce myself as, and just always try to be learning and not be wasting any time being impressed with what I already know, because what I already know is a tiny fraction of what I could know.
Well, but after 45 years, you would be forgiven for being out in the woods and saying, another red fox.
Yeah, I don't ever have that reaction. It's interesting. There's a hotel in Lake Placid, the Lake Placid Lodge, a wonderful place. They have me twice a week. They're doing programs that lead people on the same trail. Sometimes it's the same people, the repeat customers. And I honestly never get tired of it because the people are different every day. I'm changing from day to day. Perceptions and the seasons change, and one spring is not like the next spring, and the variation and just potential for things to be interested in is so vast that how could anyone ever get jaded?
There is more on heaven and earth than can be dreamt of in your imagination.
Yeah, that's it.
And being the only Shakespeare I can possibly quote off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a good one. One Shakespeare I'm going to throw back at you, it's one of my favorites, sort of a mantra, is a touch of nature makes the whole world kin. And I really like that one, especially now in the time that we're living through with so much divisiveness in our country and around the world. And I do all the stuff I do to share nature, books and columns and walks and things that I lead, and I steer clear of politics and religion because nature is a point of common ground for just about everybody. And I want to keep it that way, and like to think I might be doing some good.
Well, and is that essentially the answer to why this book at this time?
Maybe. One of the reasons for the book is sort of a prosaic reason, I suppose. Prosaic reasons are good when you're putting together prose. But
Nice.
is that I write columns, and the columns that were revised and rewritten that went into this book are from two sources. They're from a wonderful news magazine, the Adirondacks, called the Adirondack Explorer. And since the Adirondack Explorer, when I came along and started writing for them in the year 2000, already had a bird column, I wasn't allowed to write about birds. I love birds. I'm interested in birds. I look at birds every day.
You were the birder of the year at some point, were you not?
I was, yeah, but I can't write about birds, and that's appropriate. The Explorer is a wonderful bird columnist named Joan Collins these days, and a couple of predecessors. Anyhow, I wrote a newspaper column for almost 33 years for a chain of newspapers based in Connecticut, and that gig eventually ended with the shrinking of the newspaper business. And for another 10 years, I wrote a column for a Bedford, New York paper down in the suburbs. And during that time, I was living in the Adirondacks, so I wrote about Adirondack birds a fair lot. So that's where the bird material in the book comes from. But anyhow, I write this stuff. You write a column, it appears in the Explorer, comes out every other month. The newspaper was every week, and then it's gone. And most of my stuff generally is not online. So people read it. Some people do, I hope, and then it's gone. And some of the material I'm sort of fond of, and I think more people might want to read it, and maybe years later somebody might want to reread something. So anyhow, that was the reason to put together the book, was to sort of give the material new life, which I felt it deserved, and it was really a blast actually to reread all this material and dig around. And I mean, I've published, I know it's well in excess of 1 million words of nature writing. It might be close to 2. So anyhow, there's a lot of material there, and of course there's stuff there that when I go back and read it, I don't like it. Well, that stuff didn't make it into the book.
Well, I think the thing that makes your writing so delicious, if I can use that word, is the way that you manage to marry the science and the biology with the personal. In some way, as you went back through years of column writing, did putting this together feel like a memoir, writing a memoir in a way?
Yeah, it did. That's interesting perspective. Yeah, it was like writing a memoir. My kids sort of grow up in these pieces. They appear at all different ages, and I refer to friends who aren't with us anymore. And so there's an awful lot of my life there. My wife and I bought a wreck of a house on the Saranac River near Bloomingdale in the Adirondacks. Started fixing it up in the year 2000, and all those years of hard labor trying to save our house from collapse and make it into a livable place, they're all sort of interwoven in these stories too. There's a little bit of home improvement material probably in there here and there. So yeah, it brings it all back, and it's, on one hand, you read stuff you wrote some years earlier and you think, wow, that's sort of way back in the past. On the other hand, it's all incredibly fresh, and that's fun.
As you were describing that, the story or the essay or the column that came to mind from reading through this book that kind of marries the house and your past and the wildlife was your story about bobcats and your quest to really see your first bobcat. And I don't know whether you want to pick up the story from there, but it was your wife who saw the bobcat while you were kind of held captive in an outbuilding.
Yeah, that was a funny day. I'd at that point in my life, I hadn't really ever had a good look at a bobcat. I'd had a few momentary glimpses, and what an exciting animal! This is an amazing creature, the bobcat. It lives amongst us, but virtually nobody ever sees them. They're so secretive. And so my wife was in the kitchen with the kids, and I was over in an outbuilding where I have my writing studio. And we have an intercom connecting the two buildings. So she starts telling me over the intercom, Ed, there's a cat at the base of the bird feeder sitting there, and it looks sort of different. And, well, what do you mean by that? And so anyhow, she's slowly describing the cat, and it's driving me crazy. I want to scream at her, well, what does the tail look like? Because a bobcat has a short tail. It's a bobbed tail where the name comes from. And anyhow, I should have given my wife more credit than that. Debbie's a good observer. She wasn't describing the tail because she couldn't see it. The cat was sitting down. And but she noticed the striping in the face, sort of a ruff around the edges of the face. And anyhow, eventually the cat got up and she saw the tail. But part of me wanted to come charging over. But, I wanted to play fair. If I came charging over, then nobody was going to get a great look at this bobcat. So I needed to stay in my office and let everybody else have the fun.
And worse yet, your son was what, 4 or something, and seeing this too.
Yeah. So they all had a good look before I did. And then when I stepped out of my office, the door creaked or whatever, the bobcat was gone. But fortunately, it came back the next morning, so I had a great look at it the next morning.
Well, and the irony, at least in my reading this story, was that I follow your Facebook posts, which are mostly photography, and you've had, I think, a series of bobcat photos on more recently, which tells me you've gotten plenty of views of bobcats in the years since.
Yes. Well, just this winter, after I've spent my entire life trying to photograph bobcats, and I have been an abysmal failure at it. But this winter, every time I fail, I try to, you go through the stages of failure. The first one is you blame yourself and you're discouraged. But then you say, well, what can I learn? If I screwed up, what can I not screw up the next time? And so I had bobcat envy. Some friends were getting lots of trail cam footage of bobcats on their property, and their property looks a lot less bobcat friendly than ours does. But they put their trail cams up along sort of like dirt roads through their property, old logging roads. So there's a neighbor's driveway that crosses our property. And I thought, well, that driveway looks sort of like their place. I'm going to stick a trail camera up there. And sure enough, it turns out the bobcats were traveling that route.
So the photos that you post, they're from trail cams?
No.
Oh, so I was going to say, they sure don't look like it.
I started off with trail cam shots, which are, at least the trail cams that I own, shoot pretty low-quality photographs. Most of them do. And then, but the trail cam was to learn when the bobcats were coming. The bobcats initially only came at night. I had no interest in night photography of bobcats. Not to say one couldn't do it, but it's a lot of flashes, and it's just more work than I wanted to be bothered with. And I didn't really want to sit on my blind when it was 25 below zero
No.
in the middle of the night, knowing that I had about a 10% chance the bobcat might show up. So I waited in the day. And then anyhow, the camera, the trail cam, taught me when the bobcat was coming, what time of day the bobcat was coming, and then I was able to sit in my little photographic blind, which had been sitting out there for 2 months. And eventually I had success. It was very exciting.
How would you want people, I don't really want to use the word use, because saying use the book makes it seem like the answer could be as a doorstop or to press leaves, but
well, those are both good uses.
but it is not a traditional like start to finish kind of read. How would you want people to consume this book?
Well, it's interesting. Since it's arrived in my mailbox, how I've been consuming it maybe is a good way to enjoy this book. Is to sort of pick it up and read it at random. So there's a section on mammals. There's another section on birds. I've got a small section on reptiles and amphibians and plants and some other odds and ends. Some
woolly mammoths.
Yeah, woolly mammoths. Yeah, there's a story in there of me driving to Tupper Lake one winter night and actually seeing a mammoth in the middle of the road. Of course, I made it up, but I actually had sort of a vivid like daydream of that happening, and so that story is based on what felt to me as I wrote it, like a real observation. But anyhow, so I hope it's a fun book to pick up that way and just read pieces sort of here and there, and maybe somebody will get hooked. One of my favorite ones opens the book, so maybe a few people will read that first one and go on and read it sequentially. And the first piece is about white-tailed deer and their basically their romantic lives that they lead in the fall, and they sort of leave each other little personal advertisements in the woods, and how that all plays out is really quite amazing, and that was a fun one to do.
We'll play Stump Ed Kanze here. Hopefully I won't stump you, but
you can stump me.
You write not just about bears, but what bears are looking for when they awake from their hibernation or their semi-hibernation. And I was as apparently surprised as you were that they are not ravenously hungry for meat.
One of the main plants they eat, which grows here around Canton, but does not grow in our neighborhood, is skunk cabbage. Bears eat a lot of skunk cabbage when they come out of hibernation, and I don't know that scientists know why, or if they do know why, I haven't come across the answer. It's sort of a stinky plant. It's somewhat toxic, but bears are hungry for it. So, part of it, maybe it takes them a while to build up an appetite. They have to get up and come up with get a stretch of the legs. The individual pieces in the book have titles, some of which I like to think are funny.
I thought they were funny too.
and some are derived from cultural things at the time. And one of the bear pieces is "What Bears Want," I think is the title, and that title came from I wrote that piece at the time that there was a movie. I think it was Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton. Was it What Women Want?
I think that's right, yeah.
So I thought, well, I've got to write one on what... I was thinking about bears that day, so I thought, I'm going to write one about what bears want. So, and bears eat a diet like, sort of like ours. Bears are carnivores technically, by ancestry. They have the teeth of a carnivore. That's their ancestry. But the black bear eats much more plant matter than it eats animal matter. They eat a lot of insects too, so they're not really big meat eaters.
Right. I think I was surprised. I don't think I was surprised. I'm sure I was surprised. We think of the idea of bears, tearing into a fish or another mammal or whatever. But really, that's only polar bears that are essentially just carnivores.
Yeah, I believe it's a fact that the world's bears, generally, all of them are omnivores. And the one exception is the polar bear, because what else?
There are no plants.
What else does it have to eat? But all bears are omnivores. One of the main things I see black bears in the Adirondacks, and it would be true here around Canton, eating in the summertime, which has always fascinated me, is they love to eat yellow jackets. So these wasps, which we sometimes call bees, yellow jackets, which nest mostly in the ground. Bears sniff out those yellow jacket nests, dig them up. I actually watched a black bear in the Smokies once clean out a yellow jacket nest, and the yellow jackets just stung that bear on the tongue and the lips and around the eyes. The bear did not like it. The bear shook its head and growled and ran away. But after the bear had about 3 minutes to reflect, it decided, no, it was worth all those stings to eat those delicious yellow jacket
They
larvae.
must be really tasty.
Yeah, they must be wicked good. So, so that's an interesting thing about black bears. Yeah, the animals are, full of surprises, and it's been a fun thing for me being in this nature business for as long as I have, that the stories and the science has changed. And that's a great thing about science, is that scientists should change their minds when new information comes along. They shouldn't be sticking to the dogma. And, of course, all the best scientists, that's the way they work.
Such as the ones who study the Adirondack coyotes. You write a lot about how our understanding of whether they're pure coyotes has changed over the years, going all the way back to, was it your grandfather?
So when I was a kid, my Adirondack grandfather, who was my hero growing up, he was a trapper in the Depression, and as a lot of people were up here to try to pay the bills, and he saw wolves in the woods. And when I was a teenager, I knew that wolves were gone from New York State by the time he was trapping. So I used to think, Grampy was maybe wrong on that one, but he was a pretty sharp guy. I'm glad I never corrected him, because when I learned about coyotes, and coyotes were in the woods probably in northern New York by the time he was trapping, and the eastern coyote is 50 to 75% bigger than the western coyote. It's very wolf-like. particularly the males, really look like wolves. They're often mistaken for wolves. And every once in a blue moon, a wolf does wander in. So it's hard to say for sure what he was seeing, but I would imagine he was seeing coyotes, and no one really, probably at that time, really had much of a sense that they were even here.
And as you say, they were, every bit or almost as big as a wolf. So who could blame him for thinking that he was seeing wolves?
Yeah, even a scientist, I could take a distinguished mammologist who's an expert in canids, the group that the wolves and coyotes and dogs are part of, for a walk in the woods, and we could see one of these animals run by. And the expert couldn't say that it's a wolf or a coyote. They would have to look at, these days, we look at the DNA, but another way is to look at the shape of the skull. There are measurements that have to be taken. And so you can't just, see a sort of a large coyote going by and saying, well, that's definitely, that's a wolf, because it's not so clear. The differences are subtle. I would suggest that one of these days, before too long, the wolf, the gray wolf, the coyote, and the domestic dog will all be lumped together as one species. In fact, the lumping has already taken place with the domestic dog. So if you have a Chihuahua at home, the scientific name of your Chihuahua is Canis lupus. It is a gray wolf, biologically. And the Chihuahua or the Labrador Retriever or the Labradoodle, they don't look all that much like a wolf, but they're much more closely related to a wild gray wolf than the coyote is, which looks fairly wolf-like. Huh. So it's quite interesting.
Are there really giant 20-foot wildflowers out there with 5-foot wide leaves?
Yeah, I did one piece in there. I have to say, you're stumping me on that one a little bit. I did a piece on giant hogweed, which I've never seen myself in the wild. But Dick Beamish, who was the founder of the Adirondack Explorer and was always a source of column ideas for me from time to time, I think he'd seen giant hogweed in the Champlain Valley somewhere, and he was very excited and horrified by it, that this giant, highly toxic plant was going to take over. And I must have written that piece nearly 20 years ago. And giant hogweed has not taken over, but that doesn't mean it still might not. And it's a plant, I believe, there's like a task force that works on this plant. And if you find it in the road's edge in front of your house, people will arrive in hazmat suits to eliminate it. It has a phototoxin in it, giant hogweed, that you touch it and there's no immediate effect. But sunlight works on this toxin to create just horrible skin eruptions. It's really nasty stuff. But yeah, this is a plant that can be a wildflower, not a woody plant, a wildflower that can be 10 feet tall.
Just in case we needed something else to keep us up at night.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, one more thing to worry about. Forget about the stock market.
Right. So before you got here, I ran into to NCPR's book reviewer, Betsy Capus, and we were chatting about your writing. And both of us brought up the same story. I think you told it to me out loud once, and she remembers reading it. And I can't let the opportunity go by, and you're looking at me like, what story is he going to bring up? The story of how you rid your kitchen of mice.
Yeah, our entire house of mice. So anyhow, we moved into an old tumble-down fixer-upper in the Adirondacks, and of course it was full of mice. It was also full of predators coming in to get the mice. We even found marten droppings in the attic, which the martens were probably coming in to eat the mice and eat squirrels that were also getting in the house. But the mice were driving us crazy. There were so many mice in the attic, which we eventually filled with insulation, that had we vacuumed the droppings up with a shop vac and put them in a very big clawfoot bathtub, we could have filled it, I bet. The volume of mice. Now, the house...
Another thing to keep us up at night thinking about that.
The house was built in the 1920s and was there a long time, and it was only used seasonally by the family that owned it, that we bought it from. So anyhow, we needed to do something about the mice. They were all over the place and into everything. Once I opened my sock drawer one night, and there was a mother mouse in there suckling young, in my hiking socks that she had teased apart to make a beautiful nest out of. So I talked to Charlotte Demers, who was a biologist who worked at the Adirondack Ecological Center at the time, and I must have been having a rant about mice, and she said, well, we had them like that in the AEC, the Ecological Center, and we solved the problem pretty readily. Well, what's the secret? So scientists capture small mammals like mice and shrews and moles and things, and they're very hard to track in the wild. So they put them in a big plastic bag, shake them up with some fluorescent colored powder, and then let them go. And with a black light, they leave trails. So I said to Charlotte, how do we get a hold of this stuff? And her sources weren't selling it anymore. So I actually called the company that makes it, the Dayglow Corporation in Dayton, Ohio. The person who answered the phone had no idea what I was talking about. So I kept asking to speak to supervisors, and I stepped about 5 rungs up the hierarchy until I was talking to a vice president of the Dayglow Corporation. And he laughed his head off when I told him why he wanted his product. So he sent me a free industrial sample kit, which was enough colored powder to last me for years. And then my wife and I live-trapped mice, shake and baked them, as we used to call it, in a big Ziploc bag. And then we had bright blue, bright yellow, and bright orange, and bright pink. And then we'd let the mice go. At first, we did it outside the house, and that let us track some of their ways in. But eventually, they were still getting in. So then we had to, it took a couple of deep breaths, but we had to let mice trailing bright fluorescent powder loose on our carpets and things. But they led us to the tiniest little crevices and holes that they were coming in and out of. We never would have found them any other way.
And 25 years later, you are generally mouse-free?
We are generally mouse-free. We had, some years later, we had a re-invasion. So we got out the powder and the live traps again and did it again. But, it was sort of fun. And we took particular satisfaction in it because so many people told us, you will never, ever succeed in getting the mice out of your house. But we did.
We should note that this show is not technically sponsored by the Dayglow Corporation of Dayton, Ohio. But if they want to send us samples, they're welcome to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, they were nice out there. They found the whole thing very amusing.
Ed Kanze, before I let you go, considering the scope of what this book covers, is there anything in the Adirondacks that you, at this point in your career, have still never seen? Is there a holy grail of experiences for you at this point in your career?
I mean, there are endless things that I haven't seen and I'm interested in, so that's a tough one. But just to narrow it down, as a kid, I was fascinated by reptiles and amphibians. So there are some of those, and I'm still really keen on reptiles and amphibians. So I last year or 2 years ago finally saw my first Adirondack rattlesnake. That was a big plus for me. I love snakes. This rattlesnake was incredibly beautiful. That was over on the Lake Champlain side. But there's one population of lizards in the Adirondack Park. We don't have many lizards in New York State, but there are skinks down on one of the mountains down near Lake George somewhere. Drives me crazy that I've never seen one. And there's a rat snake. I love rat snakes. Are one of my favorite snakes. They eat birds as well as rats, and they're very gentle, non-poisonous snakes, just really lovely snakes. And there's a population of those down near Lake George. Never seen one. There's a really cool turtle that lives in Lake Champlain, which would be on the Adirondack shores, called the map turtle. Never seen one. So there's endless things. There's so many butterflies I'd like to see that I haven't seen, and so there's many lifetimes worth of stuff to pursue. So just have to work on the reincarnation deal.
Well, let's hope you get to see plenty of them in this life as well.
Well, thanks. I hope so too.
Ed Kanze is the author of The Nature of the Place. It came out earlier this year, and our interview first came out in April. You can read lots more about the book, find links to Ed's other work, and a link to the upcoming conversation we'll have as part of the Adirondack Experiences series in the Adirondack Library at ncpr.org/northwards. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. It is produced and hosted by me, Mitch Teich, with production support from Ethan Shanty when he is not on vacation. Digital support from Quentin Hanel, the social media expertise of Caitlin Kelly, and a theme song that was written and performed by the Whitmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. Find our back catalog, subscribe, and donate to help support the show at ncpr.org. Talk to you again soon. Thanks again for listening.